What's up, and welcome to episode 10 of the Emotional Bankroll podcast, a series where I interview DFS pros about the mental health and lifestyle of playing DFS for a living. You may have the financial means to go pro, but do you have the emotional bankroll to deal with the highs and lows? What's up? I'm Brian Jester, and in this episode, I chat with Ian Johns, who you may know as ianj300 on FanDuel and DraftKings. Ian is a top 50 ranked player in the Roto Grinders rankings, but he also secured 3 World Series of Poker bracelets before turning his attention to DFS. I chatted with Ian about how he got into both poker and DFS, his $320,000 2-day NFL main slate sweat, why it's important to recognize and capitalize on your edges and your strengths, why you have to push when you're ahead, and the importance of work and family life balance. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribed, whether it's here on YouTube or in your favorite podcast app, so you get notified when the next episode is released. Give us a thumbs up here on YouTube or a 5-star rating and review in your podcast app to help others find the show. Let's talk to Ian. All right, so this is the first guest that we've had on the podcast that has 3 World Series of Poker bracelets, and also the first guest with a Wikipedia page. So, Ian, what's up, man? Welcome to the show.
I never knew where that Wikipedia page came from. I think my wife might have sneaky done it some time ago and never told me about it. But
I mean,
it wasn't me, I promise.
That's what they all say. So again, you have 3 World Series of Poker bracelets. What is more prestigious looking back, those bracelets or your runner-up finish in the DraftKings League of Legends Championship? I know they're on the same level.
Basically, the League of Legends Championship meant way more. The bracelets are pretty much nothing compared to that.
Yeah, just imagine if you got first, how prestigious
Right.
that would have been.
Yeah, then it wouldn't even have been worth you asking.
Exactly. So Ian, you haven't done a ton of public interviews, at least not in DFS. I know you've done a couple of poker interviews. So let's talk about your background. A lot of the guests that come on the show, they're pretty public facing, so a lot of people know their story, but I imagine most people listening won't know your story. So let's start with poker first. How did you get into poker as a career?
Yeah, so I graduated high school in 2003, and I believe that's the same year that Chris Moneymaker won the main event, and poker started to experience its like major boom into the in popular culture. And I just remember my senior year of high school, my friends and I would get together. They would come to my parents' house. We had a pool table, and we'd play like $3, I mean, we were all into no money. We were seniors in high school, and we would play like $2 and $3 buy-in poker tournaments and do it for 6 hours on a Friday night and stuff. And we all just kind of got obsessed with it. And then just the way my brain works, I got a little more obsessed with it and read books and was on 2+2 forums and all sorts of forums. And by the time that summer ended, I'd like built up a little bankroll just playing sit and goes from back in the day. I don't know how much people know about those. And then got to the point where I was playing it really seriously as I started community college. And then a few months into community college, I'm playing like 8 tables of 15-30 limit hold'em at a time and winning enough money where at 18, 19 years old, you think, well, geez, why would I waste my time going to college for 4 hours a day and doing homework and stuff? And so, yeah, from then on and since, I've just been gambling for a living.
What were you going to go to school for?
I didn't really have any plan. I wasn't like a big into school, or I wasn't a great student. You know, I kind of got my shit together. Sorry, can I swear on here?
Yeah, you can swear. You can do whatever you want to say.
I won't do it too much. But yeah, I kind of got my stuff together for the last couple of years of high school just to make sure it was kind of rough at the start. So I didn't really have a plan. But yeah, I was just gonna go to school and figure it out kind of on the fly, and then poker kind of changed all that.
And I feel like a lot of poker pros have that similar type of story, especially around our age, who grew up playing in high school with Moneymaker, and then going to college and playing online and seeing the success, and then going from there. Now, what about DFS? When did you first hear about DFS, and how did you get into it?
Yeah, so I had moved to Vegas. It was probably 2013, 2014, right around there, where I was living in Vegas, and one of my good old friends who played some poker with me texted me and was like, "Hey, have you seen?" It was Draft Street back in the day. He was like, "Have you seen this? Like, do you know anything about this?" I said, "No, I got to check this out. This seems like," because we were in a fantasy football league together, and so I was like, "Wow, this is like all my interests kind of rolled up into one: gambling, fantasy sports, etc." So I started diving into it, and I believe I played probably 18 months of DFS at like anywhere from $2 to less than $100 per night, where I just was just trying to learn and trying to get better at it, and I was just obsessed with it, and I liked it so much that I would be playing whatever 40-80 poker, where I'm swinging a few $1,000s a day. But meanwhile, like thinking about this DFS for $27 all day long.
Yeah, I mean, that obsessive aspect is how a lot of DFS players and other people in similar endeavors become so successful because they become obsessed with it and they want to figure out every single strategy and every angle that there is. So you're playing a couple of dollars a night. When did you eventually start taking DFS more seriously? And when you did you take a large portion of your poker bankroll to jumpstart it, or did you just grind from that small DFS deposit?
Yeah. I never wanted to have DFS be like a serious financial leak of mine if I wasn't going to win at it. So I never really played big at all until I won some DFS winnings. And I'll never forget, actually, it was one night, and like I said, it was literally about 18 months into playing DFS where I just never had anything. I'd win a couple bucks here, like $100 here, $200 there, or whatever, and then go back down. But yeah, then one night it was like an NBA DFS tourney, and I won. I think it was like 12 grand or something. And I had probably $140 in buy-ins that night, and just kind of like with a gambling background and the way my brain works, the next day I was in for like 2,000. Obviously, it's like, oh, I'm
Obviously.
obviously good at this. So, but actually, I was lucky because I didn't really look back from there for the most part in DFS. I mean, obviously, tons of swings, but I've never really had to like DFS has always been like a source of income for me since that day, pretty much.
That's awesome. And so you always have that leap of confidence in whether it's warranted or not after that first big win. And whether it's, 10,000 or 12,000, like you said, or it's 1K or 100K or a million, like some people. But when did you settle back in, and when did you actually get full confidence in your ability to actually make money playing DFS consistently?
Yeah, so from early on, I had a friend who I worked with, and he was a big influence on me, and he's really, really smart and really, really good at it. And so that always helped me feel a little more confident in my ability to win at it. And so I just kind of kept playing DFS and poker at the same time for years and years until COVID, basically. And then when COVID hit, I was playing a lot of live poker. I was living in LA at the time, so I'd play live poker during the week, and then I'd play football DFS on the weekend. And I was playing more football than the other sports at that time. The other sports I would kind of take it easy. But then when COVID hit, I just kind of said, man, poker is not really a great option right now. So I guess I'm just gonna go all in on this DFS stuff and try to see what becomes of it. And that's kind of what leads into the League of Legends stuff. Because at first it was just the esports DFS that I was playing a ton of when COVID was first ramping up.
Yeah, so it's always funny to me because you have the people now who are still grinding esports after all the major sports are back, and I always wonder what their backgrounds are because I see you in the esports contests all the time, and I feel like a large portion of them were into esports before COVID and have been watching League of Legends and CSGO and all this stuff well before it was big in DFS when there was nothing else on. So did you not know much about esports before then, or were you actually into it before you started playing esports DFS?
So I've been a huge gamer all my life. Like I'm 37 years old and I still play like Rocket League and a few other games and whatnot. I mean, I love playing video games. Been doing it for over 30 years now. But actually, when COVID first hit and like I saw that esports in the lobby, I had no idea what even the most basic League of Legends rules were. Like I had to call my brother and we spent like an hour on the phone and he had to explain like all, even the tiniest little thing. Like I knew nothing. And then CSGO as well. I basically never watched a match or CSGO. I didn't really know. I mean, obviously it's easier to grasp than League of Legends. So that one I didn't need as much of an explanation. But yeah, both those games were very new to me. So it was a big learning curve in terms of just understanding what was happening in the games.
I think a lot of people did it, and I know personally from my perspective, I have a friend who's big into gaming, and he actually attended the League of Legends World Championship or whatever it's called a few years ago. And so when this happened, I called him up, and similar stories like, "Yo, can you explain this to me?" And he starts going like immediately starts going like champion picks, like, dude, from the basic level, please, from the most basic level, explain this game to me.
Yeah, I had the same experience with my brother. I said, slow down. But
So now that major sports are back, and things are opening back up around the country. How's your time allocated now between poker, DFS, and maybe other endeavors?
Yeah, so since COVID hit basically what 2 years ago now, I've probably played less than 10 serious poker sessions, and three or four of those came in the during the World Series last fall when I just went out for a week or so. So yeah, poker is just not like really a part of my life or a part of my income at all right now. It's been nice being at home with the family, playing DFS pretty much full time. As far as the sports, I kind of played a little bit of everything. I've been trying to learn MME a lot over the last year or so because I spent the longest time in DFS, like literally 5, 6, maybe 7 years, playing a lot of cash games and a lot of like the higher dollar, fewer max entry contests, some 2 max, 3 max, 6 max, like those types of contests. So I focused a lot of my energy on that, and then just kind of like over the last years or about a year ago, I decided I probably should try to learn MME and get a handle on it before I turn into a total dinosaur here.
So, it's funny you say that because I read some of your old poker interviews, and you said that you primarily played cash games despite the bracelets. And once you heard about DFS, was that your plan on just having a mostly cash game approach because that's what carried over from poker?
So initially, yeah, when I jumped into cash games initially and like smaller field tournaments and stuff, a lot of that had to do. I mentioned that I had a friend that I worked with, and he was a big influence on my DFS career. And we both kind of had the type of brain where we would just dive into the nitty gritty of it and like really try to decipher the difference between the running back who had a 17.4 projection and the guy who had a 17.2 projection. And it sounds silly now, but I honestly feel like back then when the projections were a little less great, and I feel like we were really good at that. And so that I think I developed a lot of edge from that. Like I would think a lot about, oh well, the third string running back is hurt and he plays like 6% pass downs in a given game and blah 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 blah, and that should up the other guy's pass or reception projection, yada yada yada, that sort of thing. But I mean, we would dive heavy into that stuff, and that kind of lend itself more to a cash game approach, I think, or a small field approach. And so yeah, like that was sort of where I started, and so I never really got into the MME strategy, and I kind of stick to myself a lot, and so I never really got into any circles where we talked about strategy or would go over MME type thoughts, and so yeah, just kind of that's just the way it went, and then like I said, about a year ago, it just kind of became clear that I need to learn MME if I'm going to be doing this, on a full-time level.
A quick timeout to remind you that this episode is sponsored by the lineup builder at Occupy Fantasy, powered by DFS Magic. Are you tired of expensive DFS optimizers not providing the settings and tools you need to create profitable lineups in all sports? Check out the lineup builder at Occupy Fantasy, created, built, and used by top DFS pros. Use it to hand build entries or automatically create up to 150 lineups using optimal lineup criteria and sport specific settings. Visit occupyfantasy.com/lineup builder for more information. Now back to the show. That makes sense. So, how would you describe your play style and your process? And maybe you can compare poker versus DFS. And when I'm thinking play style, more GTO, more unorthodox, or maybe you have other ways to describe your play style.
Yeah, so I think actually my poker and my DFS play styles are similar. I would say like if you can equate like playing sort of chalky in DFS to playing tight in poker and playing loose in poker and aggressive to playing like contrarian in DFS, I'd probably go more toward the tight and chalky side of both. I do try to think for myself a lot. Like I don't try to leave myself too beholden to projections, and so I think that can lend me to some sort of off the wall ideas that other people might not be on. That's sort of been my play style, but also my curse in both, where I feel like it can be limiting in terms of in poker, if people know that you're tight and kind of don't question your approach very much, it can hurt you in ways. Obviously, you're going to make fewer mistakes than the people who are really loose and crazy, but your opponents will generally play better against you if they feel like they know what you have. And then in DFS, I feel like I often lean into maybe too much of the quote unquote best plays or chalk, and maybe not quite different enough in tournaments different as I should be, and that's something I've been trying to work on over the last year, like I said.
Yeah, and that's tough, especially when you come from that type of background. If you come from a cash game approach or a cash game mentality, it is hard to break out of that box to think of the more upside plays to get you to the top of those tournaments. So, how do you evaluate your processes? And again, whether it's DFS or poker, and what kind of data points or results are you using for your evaluations?
Yeah, it's never been like a big strong suit of mine. A lot of it is just kind of trial and error, learning, watching other great players. Just since I started playing a lot of MME, I've been using Fantasy Crutcher's lineup study and just trying to like see what the other great players are doing. I don't really have the capability like on the computer or anything to or enough of a math background to run simulations or things like that. And so I'll kind of like look at a lot of the great players' lineups and exposures and kind of try to reverse construct what they were thinking and then try to put my own spin on it.
Is that something you would ever do in poker too? Because I know, especially in the early days, there wasn't as much information out there on what was the quote unquote right thing to do when you have certain hands in certain spots. But towards more recently now, right? There's so many different tools out there, and you can study different players' approaches. Would you ever do anything like that in poker to see what top players or what other players may do in similar situations?
Yeah, for whatever reason in poker, I had a lot more of a community that I would discuss with. So like back in the way back in the day on 2+2 forums, I don't know if you or any of your guests have heard about them, but 2+2 forums used to be super open place for discussion, and people would give you very real like feedback on hands that you played, and there would be really, really amazing discussion. And so even if the like Pio Solver and those types of things didn't exist like they do now that had the right answer, we would really break it down to the point where we felt pretty good about what sharp plays were in certain situations. And then as I migrated to live poker more, I had a lot of good friends that played at a super high level. So you could get a lot of feedback that way. Whereas in DFS, I've kind of been having to do it more on my own and using the software that's available to me.
That's interesting. It's very interesting to hear the comparisons between the two. And really quickly, when I invite you on this show, you said I'd probably be the perfect guest if my last 7 years are any indication. And we'll dive deep into specific areas here in a bit. But can you explain what you meant by that?
Oh yeah, I mean, like the emotional toll that DFS and just gambling in general has had on me has been like pretty immense over my career because I've basically never made a dollar doing anything other than gambling. And so I kind of live it. I'm kind of in it more than more than most people, I think. Like I live and breathe and die by my gambling results pretty much. And I don't know why I never really branched out, but it's like a passion of mine. And so I always think, well, if I can make money doing this, I don't really want to think about other things. And it definitely hasn't been all roses. Like I'm on probably my biggest downswing ever right now currently. So, it's been some good times, some tough times, but yeah, I've gone through the gauntlet as a gambler for sure.
Love to hear that. And don't worry, we'll get into the downswing here in a bit. But let's talk about the upswing and some of the highs. And I know some of the questions I'm going to ask are about poker, and people are here for DFS, but I think there's so many similarities, especially in the emotional management and the bankroll management, that a lot can apply to people listening who play DFS. So, talking about these three World Series of Poker bracelets that you've won, your bracelet wins have come in limit events, and you were, or at least you said you were primarily a limit poker player. And maybe before you answer the question, maybe just a quick refresher or explanation for people who don't know much about poker, the difference between limit, pot limit, no limit, and what that means. And then based on your experience and the events that your bracelets were won in, how integral do you think it is, both in DFS and in poker, to recognize your strengths as a player and then capitalize on those strengths?
Yeah, so No Limit Hold'em is sort of like the popular game that you see on TV that they play in all the biggest tournaments in the world, and it's pretty basic. I mean, you can bet any amount at any time is more or less the gist of it. In limit poker, the betting is fixed, and for whatever reason, when I like so you might be able to bet $2 before the flop, $2 on the flop, $4 on the turn, $4 on the river. It's a fixed limit, and you can raise in those increments. For whatever reason, that I was always drawn to that game to limit games. It was Hold'em for like 10 years, and then I started playing the mixed games quite a few years later. And yeah, No Limit Hold'em and Pot Limit Omaha, which are probably the two most popular games there are, just never really drew me in, and I didn't find them fun or interesting, and I just kind of they seemed boring to me. So I never really played them because in limit you're making a lot of decisions a lot quicker, and then in no limit it's kind of like you make one big one or two big ones an hour. I mean, I'm sure the great no limit players are kind of dancing a little more than I do, but not really knowing what I was doing, I would sit there and be bored and then make one big decision and have it determine my night basically.
Right.
So I never really got into it. So anyway, yeah, as far as like sticking to your strengths, yeah, like when I would go play tournaments at the World Series of Poker, I might play 13 events in a year, and 11 of them would be limit tournaments, and then two of them would be like low buy-in, large field, no limit tournaments where I can still hang. Like I still know how to play like well enough, but I'm certainly not an expert by any means. But I still think I probably have some profitability in those events. But yeah, I mainly stuck to my bread and butter, which was the limit tournaments. And I think I mean, anytime you gamble, it's hard to really branch out too much without expecting to go on severe downswings if you're doing stuff that you're not super proficient in.
I mean, there's only so much time in the day for you to perfect your craft in all these different areas, right? So if you can perfect it in one and see a high ROI there, why not capitalize on those strengths, especially for a lot of people out there listening who don't do DFS full time. So, continuing on this topic of the WSOP bracelets, you won your first back in 2006. So, what was your reaction to winning that bracelet, and how were you able to keep a level head and continue with your normal approach? Because I know you say you didn't play a lot of tournaments, but after winning one bracelet, how were you able to pull back and not just start hammering tournaments each year?
Yeah, I was 21 years old when that happened. That was the first WSOP event I ever played in, so that was
Sick.
pretty crazy. I was like, "This is easy," but uh, obviously it's not. But yeah, I always just like cash games a lot too. I mean, I always played a lot of tournaments, but I knew I was never really like a no limit hold'em guy. So I played plenty of tournaments after that and continued to play them for years. And maybe if I never would have won that bracelet, I might have quit playing them. I don't know. But I always enjoyed tournaments, even when I was playing a lot online. I was playing no limit hold'em tournaments, all the limit tournaments I could find, that sort of thing. So I find the competition aspect of them super fun. And so, yeah, a big part of my like gambling life is I do things that I think are fun and interesting. And so, the fact that I find tournaments fun and interesting, I try to develop a strategy to win at them, and it's gone okay.
It's a novel concept to have fun at what you do do in life.
Yeah,
So glad to see you do
yeah.
that. So okay, so and then in 2016, you win two bracelets. That's 10 years after your first bracelet. And I know you just say you don't play for the bracelets, you play for money. But did you ever feel like at any point during that 10-year, we'll call it a drought, right? Even though you weren't playing for bracelets, did you feel like you were pressing more or doing things for the wrong reasons during that 10-year stretch?
No, I never really felt that way because obviously anybody with any sort of grip on reality and expectation, I mean, you show up to an event, there's anywhere from 120 and like the huge like $10,000 buy-ins, which I've played some of, to thousands of players in the $1,500 no limit buy-ins. You're not going to win that many of them, and I was only playing, like I said, 10 to 15 usually a year. I think maybe one year I played like 25 events, and I had a couple. I had like a third place finish and a bunch of like sort of 10th to 12th or 16th type runs. And like I feel like I had a pretty good grip on what my expectations were and what I was there for and what the most likely outcomes were. So not winning for 10 years didn't even I didn't even think about it. And like I would just go and I would play, and I'm trying to win money and I enjoy it, but I know that you can't just win bracelet. You can't just like snap a bracelet off like nothing. And so I just kept playing. Then boom, it happened. It happened again. 2016. It was a horse event, and I got to the final four, and it was some guys that probably a lot of your crowd has never heard of, but like it was four very, very good players left, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. That we kind of weeded through some of the less skilled players, I guess, and like the final four people were really top notch, I think. So to win that felt really cool.
I mean, that's huge to beat. It's one thing to win the bracelet, right? But then to face competition like that and win the bracelet is something completely different. And then 10 days later, you win another bracelet. So your third total, your second during that summer. And you hear, whether it's professional athletes, whether it's poker players, whether it's DFS players, they have this in the zone feeling where things are going right and wins are piling up, shots are falling, whatever you want to call it, right? Did you, feel more confident during that stretch, whether it was either after the first win or the second win or anything like that? And how did that impact your decision making in play, if so?
Yeah, that was totally my experience, which is kind of crazy because there's no way to really put words to it, but it's just kind of playing with so much a combination of patience, but then aggression when you do get in there, and and so much certainty, and you just everything just feels very clear to you in the moment what the right course of action is. I had like multiple hands where like I would bet on the river with ace high, knowing it was the best hand and expecting to be called and get called and win, and just like stuff like that where it's just you just kind of have such a good feel for what's going on in every hand you play essentially that it just becomes silly at some point, like how good you feel about how it's going. I mean, it's one of those things, like I said, you just can't put words to it, but it's in the zone, it's whatever, all the things that you described, and I definitely had that feeling, and it was really cool, and haven't had it since.
I was going to ask. I mean, it is such a sick feeling, but have you experienced that in DFS at all to any extent?
um a little bit, yeah. It's fleeting for sure. I mean, with my style, it would be nice because that's kind of the way I play DFS, where I'm kind of looking for that sort of certainty or conviction. But DFS is such a it'll beat you down so much that it can be really hard to live with that conviction because so often you can feel that way and be wrong. But yeah, I mean I've experienced it in minor ways in DFS, but I feel like in poker there's a little more like very direct one for one, I was right, and you get that instant gratification, and right away. But yeah, I have experience in DFS, but it's more clear in poker, like when it's happening.
For sure. And going really quickly back to what you said about doing things for fun, you said in an interview after your 2016 bracelet win that, quote, the feeling between my first victory and this one is the same. I'm hyper. I'm excited. I don't think that ever goes away when you get this close and then achieve it. If it does go away, then maybe that's when you shouldn't play anymore. And I think that's a great quote. Do you think that's the litmus test for when it's time to hang it up in the gambling world or maybe even any other career when the wins or the accomplishments don't excite you anymore?
For me, yeah, but I mean, everybody's their own person, and I've definitely like I listened to a few episodes of your pod, and like some of the guys that don't get excited for X dollar amount wins, and I can't relate, but I get, to each his own. But for me, yeah, I mean, it's always fun and it's always exciting. Like no matter what, if I won 30,000 tonight in DFS, I would be happy and excited. But that's just kind of the way I operate, I guess. And like I said, I really truly do love it, and I always have, and yeah, it's fun. And so yeah, I still feel that way. If I didn't enjoy it and I didn't think that was cool, I might look for something else to do for a living that I did enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of DFS and your big wins, what I mean, you've had a lot of big wins in DFS, right? Some multiple six-figure cashes. What has been your biggest DFS day ever?
So this is a crazy story, actually. Really crazy. So I don't know if you recall, but it was maybe two years ago, 2 seasons ago now, maybe 2019 season. It was a NFL slate, and I was playing in. I had quite a bit on the line on FanDuel, and 5 minutes into the slate, it became clear that FanDuel wasn't going to have any live scoring.
It was the worst sweat in DFS history. It lasted like two
It was
days.
it was all zeros, right?
Yes.
And so I had one entry in like the $3,300 whatever high roller event with 200,000 to first, and then I had like 8 entries in the monster 555 and whatever. I had a bunch of other entries, and so I had this team in the $3,300 one, and I was like kind of looking at it like, oh my god, he scored, he scored, he scored, he scored, and like everybody scored. And on FanDuel, touchdowns are super important, obviously. And come the end of the night, I'm like, man, that team did pretty good. Let me like look because there's so many times when you look and your team went off, but everybody else's team went off, and
Right.
so it didn't matter. So I started clicking through teams. There was 160 teams in the thing, and I was just like, all right, let me just click through and just see. And I started clicking through, and I'm just kind of eyeballing it. Okay, that team didn't beat me. That team didn't beat me. That team didn't beat me. Okay, this team was close, and I would like hand tally the scores, because I was just so curious because I knew my team did really well. I had a
Right.
big day, and I knew the ownership on some of them. And I had like I think I had Brandon Cooks like 5%, and he went off, and like so I was like, this could be really good. So anyway, I calculated all, or I mean, I went through it all. I kind of eyeballed every team. I couldn't find one that I thought beat me, and then keep updating FanDuel hoping it's going to update, and then it never does. And so later in the night, I was like having trouble sleeping. I got up and I did it again. I went through all 160 teams again because I'm sick, I guess. And I couldn't find one that beat me. So then I went to bed and I'm sleeping terribly because
Right.
I really truly believe that I might have won like a quarter million or something.
Right.
And at like 4 a.m. or something, Fantasy Cruncher tweets out, "Congrats, to me on Twitter, blah blah blah. You won this tournament. You also won the $555 monster for 100K." And I was like, "Wait, hold on, this is
Shit.
crazy." Like FanDuel still hasn't updated, but Fantasy Cruncher, they have they pull in the
Oh,
lineups,
right, right.
and they ran it all. And I'm like, well, that's pretty dang cool, but FanDuel still hasn't updated, and I'm having all these panic attacks, like maybe they'll cancel the slate because there was no late swap
Right.
available, like
Yeah, yeah.
that sort of thing. So anyway, long story short, or long story long, I should say. Yeah, I won like 320,000 or
Wow.
something. So that was totally nuts and in an absolutely insane way to have it happen.
It's not your typical story, right? Where you're watching the end of the game, you
Oh,
need one play
right.
to happen. No, you're literally sweating this for 24 hours.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that was nuts. Yeah, it was like 3 o'clock the next day, Pacific time
And
that I actually found out.
were you like me, where you're watching each player's score incrementally come in, and you're updating
Oh
the
yeah.
leaderboard?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I was like, oh,
Man,
I'm winning 12,000 right now. That's pretty cool.
that's so sick. Oh, that's such
Sammy
a sick.
Sammy Watkins just scored
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
Monday
18 hours
afternoon.
later. Yeah, that's so
So yeah,
sick.
that was crazy. It was a
Man.
crazy way for that to happen. Yeah, that was my biggest win ever. So
That's an awesome day. So 300K plus.
yeah,
That's huge. Is that bigger than that was bigger than your
yeah,
WSOP
that was
wins, right?
bigger than either bracelet. I had two bracelets that were 290 each. So
Sweet.
or
Cool. And so, I mean, you've had some top live final finishes as well. 2016, I think you've had two top 20 finishes, which I guess 2016 was a pretty big year for you. What were those experiences like, going to the live finals, meeting people, and having that sweat?
yeah, so I ended up going to the one in New York at the Jay-Z 4040 Club. So that was very cool to just kind of hang out there and meet a bunch of people and see some people I did know. And crazy enough, on the back of my last story, DraftKings scoring went down mid live final that day. And so, we're all sweating. And then, like, toward the end of the first game, the DraftKings scoring goes kaput. And then, well into the second wave of games, there was still no DraftKings live scoring. And
God.
so, every time somebody scores, there's all this excitement and kind of uncertainty about like who's doing well, who's how your lineup might be doing. So weirdly enough, two of my biggest DFS, that wasn't one of my biggest wins ever. It was a nice win, but it was a big day. You're sweating the live final. We're impacted by crazy live scoring malfunctions. But yeah, so that was a lot of fun and memorable for that reason. And I think I finished like 14th or something. It was a good sweat. It was fun.
That's awesome. I mean, it's crazy that two of your biggest days have come when you're not even sure where you stand in the contest. I mean, that's quite the mental roller coaster for you. So, speaking of mental roller coasters, I guess it's time to talk about the low sum, and let's talk about handling swings. So, and this could be for poker, it could be for DFS, it could be from a length of time perspective, it could be a total dollar amount perspective, or it could be from a mental aspect as well. But what's the worst downswing you've had in your career?
Yeah, I mean, probably around a $250,000 is the worst downswing I've had. I've never played like super super high limits. I mean, I played plenty big, but and I've always been really good at scaling back like when I'm losing. I've always had a knack for sort of bankroll management and not putting myself in too many horrible situations financially. So yeah, like they're the type of downswings where they could have been a lot worse if I would have just kept my foot on the gas pedal. But I tend to scale up when I'm winning and scale back when I'm losing. And then yeah, I said I'm on the tail end of one right now, or hopefully the tail end. Cross my fingers. It's been like 8 months or so, and really like trying on me mentally because, like I said, this is kind of like it for me. Like I'm in a position where I kind of have to win, and or I have to explore something else that where I might end up winning. And so, yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's really tough mentally because I'll always kind of compare myself to the top players at all times, even if I know I'm not like quite up to their level, especially in like the MME setting. But I still want to get there, and I still strive to get there, and so it can be both frustrating mentally without, by not succeeding, and then obviously being on a financial downswing is tough as well. So there's no doubt that that's tough mentally. But my wife is sort of she's a mental coach, like a performance coach.
Oh, wow. That's huge.
She's recently started that, and so having her in my life has been a huge help because she always kind of keeps me straight mentally. But but yeah, it's tough.
I mean, I would love to hear more about that. And again, you don't have to go deep into your relationship, but maybe what kind of exercises or thought processes are you working on with her that can help you through these kind of situations?
We don't work a ton on a formal level, but she's just really good about keeping my head in a decent space. I don't know. It might work if we dove into it on a formal level, but I don't know. There's always kind of that husband-wife dynamic that kind of would make that a little different. But yeah, she's been by my side. We've been together since I was 16, so she's
So
been by my side for
she knows the ups and
forever.
downs then.
Oh yeah, she's lived it all with me, so we've kind of been through it all together, and she's always kept me sane and kept me on the right foot, and I always credit her for. I always tell her like I would be a bum if it weren't for her because I probably would have just, you know, done stupid stuff after school and yada yada yada.
I mean, it's so huge to have, and whether it's a community or especially a partner to be that understanding is massive for not only your mental health, but your confidence in continuing to do what you do. So, I mean, you're very lucky to have that in your corner. So, because of poker, or maybe because of her too, do you think you are desensitized or hardened at all to downswings? And how do you, right now, if you had to judge it, how do you feel you handle these emotional or financial swings?
Um, I think I'm definitely hardened compared to like the layman who doesn't gamble for a living, but is in terms of like a gambler, I'm probably not, especially hardened more than most other people. I mean, I take it really serious, and I take it hard when I lose, and it sucks. And I try to enter every slate with sort of a hopeful, mentality, and get my mind right before I play. But then, if it doesn't go well and it's not gone well for a long time, it can get difficult for sure. And I try to just like be aware of that and stay self-aware about where my mental is at any given time. But yeah, I would never say that it doesn't affect me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's unreasonable to think that it would never not affect you, right? So, I've had a few former poker players on here, and they all have answered this question the same way. So I'm curious to get your angle. What do you think has the worst swings, poker or DFS?
Yeah, I think they're very different. Poker a much more is a much more tangible experience. Obviously, like you're actually, grabbing cash out of your player's box, or bringing it from the bank, or where, however you handle it, you're showing up with actual dollars, sitting down and playing with chips that represent the actual money, and then having it sort of disappear in front of you if you lose. And it can feel very painful for that reason. Whereas DFS sort of has that sort of video game element where the dollars on the screen represent points or whatever in a way. And like that's how my brain operates at least. So um, like I'm probably a little more numb to the DFS swings because just mainly for that reason. Whereas like poker can feel so punishing in the moment when you're just getting beat up and like you're sitting there and there's seven other people, X amount of dollars. Um, I would say the poker is probably more painful for that reason. DFS, you kind of do it in your own home, and you're not really like, I don't know, it's less painful to me.
I guess because there is obviously competition in DFS, right? But there's not that face-to-face competition, or at least one-on-one aspect like there is in poker, right?
Right. Yeah. And you don't have to look at the guy that's beating you. You don't have to, know that eyeballs are on you. You don't have to sit there with like two stacks of chips when everybody else has, three racks worth, or whatever it may be, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you mentioned, excuse me, you mentioned that yeah, you've been pretty good at the bankroll management side of things, scaling up when you're winning, pulling back when you're losing. And honestly, pretty much every single guest I've had on the show so far has said that that's an area of DFS that they really don't think they're that great at. And I'm sure they're pretty good at it, or they wouldn't be where they are today. But a lot of people will admit that they're not that great at it. So for you to hear that you are good in that area, I would love to pick your brain about maybe some tips or tricks you have when either when you're winning or when you're losing on how to manage your money, how much risk you're taking. Are you playing similar to when you're up versus down, the contest you're entering, things like that?
I mean, I just think it's so incredibly important. And let's just say you can win at whatever gambling venture that you're doing, right? You have the ability to win. After that ability to win, I think managing the bankroll is probably the most important thing because you want to be able to do it for the long term and you don't want to put yourself in a position where you can't do it anymore. And but also on the flip side of that, so like a lot of people talk about bankroll management in terms of safety and like not going bust or losing all the money you have in your account or whatever. To me, part of bankroll management is that willingness to push it when you're winning and things are going well. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to like win money that's significant, you know? So if every time you're ahead, your tendency is to quit the poker game or play smaller in DFS so you don't lose what you won, now you're limiting your theoretical profit potential going forward, you know? So I've always been of the mind that when I'm winning or if I want to take a shot, as long as I sort of know where I stand financially before I take that shot or when I'm taking that shot, I think that's totally fine and probably optimal, the way to go. But then you sort of have to be aware when you are losing that okay, shot taking time is done. Now you have to be sound and be smart and not put yourself in a position where you won't be able to play anymore. And so yeah, for me, it's always just been a press when winning. Stay up all night. If you're crushing the poker game and you have a good image, just stay there and keep hammering away because so few of the nights go like that, or like so few sessions go like that, or so few stretches in DFS go like that, that you have to maximize those when you do, and then in turn try to minimize when things are going bad. So
I mean, that's a really interesting take. And I think a lot of people, when we talk about bankroll management, most of them focus on when they're in downswings and how to pull back and how to change allocations. But only RBX, who, surprise, is also a poker player, has talked about pushing it when you're ahead too. And you're right, that's a very important part of playing DFS or playing. And do you think that it's kind of going back to what we talked about being in the zone and having confident decision making? You think that also compounds when you're pressing when you're ahead, right?
100%. I was gonna follow up with that for sure. Like, I mean, if you could just think about any situation when things are going well, and let's say you had money on the line, you'd want to be playing for more. If things are going well, and usually when things are going well, I mean, in poker it's more direct because like you're at a table with six or seven other guys, and when things are going well for you, it's a zero sum game, and they're going kind of poorly for them. In DFS, things will go well for you, but people don't really notice. Like,
Right.
I mean, it doesn't affect that guy because he's still playing a tournament with 20,000 entries and like he didn't care that you're winning or anything like that. And it's a zero sum game in that way, but there's not that one-to-one level of competition like we talked about with poker. But I still believe that like your decision making in DFS and your confidence level with the decisions that you are making, that yeah, when things are going well, I like to gamble for more personally. I think, and that advice might not be for everybody, but it's definitely served me well over the years.
For sure, and just love to hear that because it's a very interesting take on things. And for someone who's successful, I think a lot of people can gain a lot from that advice. All right, let's talk about the lifestyle a little bit. And I say this every episode: being a DFS pro or a poker pro, not that glamorous sometimes, or most of the time, from a lifestyle perspective. Sitting all the time, you're glued, especially for DFS, you're glued to devices all hours of the day. How do you, Ian, combat or try to balance that? Do you do any physical exercise, meditation, mental health, mindfulness, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm terrible. I I've done I've done a little exercise and a little mental health, like meditation type stuff over the years, but overall, I mean, it's just like I haven't handled it great. I try to make sure I'm in touch with friends and I play like golf whenever I can. That helps clear my head. But yeah, the exercise thing has been a bugaboo of mine, like where I kind of start and stop and usually more stopping than starting. Um, I do feel like meditating for a time. I meditated for a decent amount of time actually and kind of got to a reasonable point of mindfulness where I was sort of aware, like self-aware of what my mind was doing and how I was feeling at any given time. I think that's really important, and that's been another thing that my wife has helped me with a lot. So yeah, I mean, obviously, I believe all those things are very important, but I have not been the best at them.
Yeah, realizing that they're important and actually doing them are two majorly different things. I think we
Very
all
much so.
understand, especially as we get older and we become busier. And you have a wife, but you also have kids. And I thought this was another great quote from you. You once tweeted that your most productive habit is reading to your kids every night before bed, which I think a lot of parents can aspire to do. So, how important is family and life balance to you, Ian? And how well do you think you accomplish that?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty good at it. I have a really good relationship with my wife and with my kids. I try to I mean, I definitely have my times where, like you said, I'm glued to my devices or I'm sweating sports and kind of I can lose track of that sometimes. But yeah, regarding that tweet, that was 100% true. Like I banged out the entire Harry Potter series with each of my kids, and so that was kind of cool.
Wow.
Like literally like 5 or 6 pages a night, at a time. And so, it was a long and arduous process, but definitely a worthwhile thing to do because obviously reading is a great thing for kids. So you get them to get their imagination running. You spend some time with them. It establishes a bond there. They kind of know that you're there for them and you love them and you're there every night, that you can be. And yeah, I mean, I just think that's a really. I mean, there are 1,000 ways to sort of accomplish the same thing that me reading to my kids every night, what that did for me and my kids. But whatever that is, I think that sort of bonding time is really important, obviously.
That's huge, and that's a great way to do it. And I think at least a lot of the guests that have come on the show that have families, they always talk about the importance of that. So it's good to see that there is a high importance placed on that, and you think that you're able to accomplish that. Most of the other guests here are able to accomplish that as well. You mentioned sometimes you're on your device, you're sweating sports. What sports do you sweat? What are your favorite sports to play? What are your favorite sports to watch? And are you sweating for the sweat aspect of it, or do you actually enjoy watching some of the games?
Oh yeah, I'm a total sicko. Like I sweat for the sweat, and like when I'm playing League of Legends, like the LPL overnight stuff, like I wake up in the middle of the night, check my phone, watch a game, fall back asleep. Like I have so much trouble not sweating it once I'm financially invested. Like I'm sick. I'm a sick person for sure. So yeah, like I'm sweating all the sports that I'm playing because I just love it. I think it's super fun.
Dude, it is
Um,
fun, right? You get first of all, you put all your time into it, right? You want to see how it turns out. And at least League of Legends, there's nothing better than waking up and grabbing your breakfast and watching some League of Legends matches to close out a slate. So,
it's too great. And the other thing is, I do truly believe that there's a little value in like sort of sweating, getting a feel for how the games go, and like what types of players there are, and what which players perform in which ways. Like I think that there's some intrinsic value in that, but it's mostly just because I like the sweat.
that's fair. So, what do your non-gambling friends and family think of your career?
Most of them, I mean, they had a few questions at first, but at some point, it's not quite as interesting. I always hear people have the take that like when they meet people, they won't tell them what they do, or they say I work in finance or the fantasy sports industry. I always just tell people I gamble for a living, and I think it's cool that like they have questions and then we talk about it. It brings like a nice jumping off point for a conversation. I don't know. I guess I'm social that way, and at times where it's kind of nice to have something that will kickstart a conversation as opposed to like, oh, I'm an accountant. The conversation just never goes anywhere with that. So yeah, I kind of enjoy that. You know, shooting the shit about it, and like they'll ask me questions and I'll answer them, and hopefully it doesn't turn into like a situation.
I mean, it is funny because when you say that, and when I ask every guest that question, and most of them do respond that same way. Where I, on the other hand, I do feel like you, and I enjoy talking about it, and not from a bragging perspective, but it's just interesting to talk about. And like you said, yo, you're a lawyer. Oh, you work for a nonprofit. Cool. Now, what do we talk about? The weather, right? If you say something interesting like this that most people never hear of out in the world as a profession, it does start a lot of different types of conversations, and you do end up getting to meet new people in a different way.
For sure, yeah, and what we do, like, I'm in front of my computer by myself a lot, like, especially once poker wasn't a part of my life, I lost a little bit of that, like, camaraderie or just, people to talk to and hang out with. So I think it's kind of cool to try to jumpstart those types of conversations. I don't know. That's for me though.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Ian, this has all been a great conversation. So I'll let you get out of here because I know you got some lineups to build here probably pretty soon. So we'll close it out with some final advice. And I ask this to every single guest. What do you think is the most important skill to have in being a DFS or gambling pro?
I think to gamble professionally at anything, you have to have a ton of self-awareness and just be very in tune with your edges or your lack of edges, and you have to know like what lane you need to be in and whether you should be doing it at all or not. You cannot go into gambling with too much confidence or too much pride to admit that you maybe are up against it here and shouldn't be gambling in this specific arena. So yeah, to me that's the number one skill that you have to have before anything else, because if you convince yourself that you can win at something that you can't, it's never going to go well. So yeah, aside from like the skills of playing the game, that's the number one thing, and that kind of falls into the bankroll management, like that sort of sphere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really, really important. So if someone out there is listening to this and they decide, you know what, I want to be a DFS pro, or I want to be an online poker pro in New Jersey, or I want to start betting on sports for a living, what would you tell them? Anything in it particular? Would you say, yes, you should go out and forward, or you should tell them, hey, go find a different career? What would you say?
I probably wouldn't advise what I've done for a career. I mean, it probably was a million quote unquote easier paths for me to take. But like I said, I really do love what I do, and I enjoy the challenge. And I think if someone was insistent that they did want to do it, I would say that, like, let's say you have a real job or whatever it may be. The number one thing is you have to prove to yourself that you can earn it. So I wouldn't dump like my savings into like my starting bankroll or anything like that. Like, start small, win, prove to yourself that you can win, and then kind of accomplish it that way, as opposed to just trying to make that decision before you've proven it to yourself.
That's super important. And Ian, this has been great. And I know you don't do very many interviews at all. So I appreciate you coming on the show and talking about all of these topics. So I'll give you the floor if you have any final thoughts, anything we haven't talked about, or I don't know, maybe there's something you want to promote.
No, I got nothing to promote. But no, it's a really cool show. I've listened to quite a few episodes done already, and it's you're doing a really good job. I really enjoy it.
Appreciate that, Ian. So everyone out there, thanks for listening. And Ian, thanks again for coming on the show.
All right, man. Thanks for having me.